4,000 years ago, before the rise of the Roman Empire, before the golden age of Greece, hundreds of years before the epic fall of Troy, a mysterious people thrived in the Mediterranean, the Minoans of Crete. Crete was a blossoming island, and its people lived in luxury. Here, the first cities of Europe grew magnificent, and the fruitful land was like paradise. No outside enemy seemed to threaten the peaceful life. The sea itself was a friend to the Cretans, never a threat. Yet suddenly, a natural disaster began a chain of events that would lead to the destruction of this peaceful world. A powerful volcano hurled deadly lava over the land, cities collapsed, and in years to come, foreign conquerors would subjugate the island, and the empire of the mighty Minoans would be lost forever. "1900 years before Christ, a unique culture emerged in the Mediterranean, a new nation that would become the cradle of Western civilization. An empire built on a mastery of sea and trade. For hundreds of years, their ships roamed the Mediterranean unchallenged. According to legend, Zeus, highest of the gods, took the form of a bull and seduced a princess named Europa. The offspring of their love was Minos, Crete's first king. Later, the wife of Minos also fell in love with a bull. She gave birth to a monster who was half man, half bull. Minos, though, kept him hidden in a winding maze deep beneath his palace. As revenge, Minos demanded a horrible human sacrifice from the Athenians. Every 9 years, 7 youths and 7 maidens from Athens were thrown down to the bloodthirsty Minotaur, a monster with a taste for human flesh. Theseus, son of King Aegeus of Athens, insisted on accompanying the youths and the maidens to Crete and to slay the Minotaur in his labyrinth. He pledged to his father to hoist white sails upon his return as a sign of victory. If he were to die, the sails would be black. The way to the Minoan Empire led over the sea towards the south. Led by Theseus, the hostages arrived on Cretan ground. The road leading from the harbor to the palace of Knossos appears to be never-ending. How many other young people before them had crossed this same surface on their approach to certain death? The Athenians were curiously welcomed by the Minoans. Was it here that Ariadne, King Minos' daughter, for the first time saw and fell in love with the handsome Theseus? Despite their fear, the young Athenians gazed in amazement at the architectural splendor that surrounded them. Halls were supported by great columns. Stairs led down into a ritual bathing room. Was this where they were to be prepared for death? On the day of the sacrifice, the young Greeks were led into the labyrinth in a ceremonious procession, into the stone maze from which no human being had ever come out alive. Designed by the brilliant architect Daedalus, the labyrinth was inescapable. It was here that the fearsome Minotaur sat on his throne and awaited his victims. There was no escape. The roar of the creature petrified the young Athenians. But Princess Ariadne was on their side. She had smuggled a ball of yarn to Theseus, and with its thread, he was able to find the way out of the labyrinth. Fearlessly, he confronted the monster and was victorious. With Ariadne now on board, the Athenians put to sea. On the island of Naxos, an angry god induced in Theseus a deep sleep and stole his young bride. Grieving his loss, Theseus put up black sails. On seeing the approaching black sails, Theseus' father was grief-stricken and threw himself into the sea, which has since borne his name, the Aegean. Today, the serenity of Crete is a far cry from the fabled land of half-human monsters and bloody sacrifices. Much of what is encountered today seems barely to have changed in the course of its mysterious past. Just as in ancient times, the forests were logged because the wood was needed for palaces and ships. Sheep and goats graze here as they have for thousands of years. The work of farmers and shepherds give little hint that this island was once the center of a powerful commercial empire. After centuries of foreign occupation, residents here are more aware of their immediate past. The tale of the Minotaur faded into legend. Only at the beginning of this century, following independence from the Ottoman Empire, were archaeologists able to start digging into Crete's great past. In 1900 at Knossos, the British archaeologist Arthur Evans exhumed an incredible 1,500 rooms, halls, passageways and courtyards, all belonging to one single building, the King's Palace. The architecture was so bewildering that Evans was convinced he had found the Minotaur's labyrinth. Based on what Evans found, archaeologists today have built an accurate picture of what this once great empire looked like. Modern technology offers an impression of the palace's extraordinary splendor. Massive entrance portals leading into the palace. Ceremonial buildings, holy places, storehouses, and many workshops are grouped around a large central courtyard. Here was the hub of the empire. Surrounding the palace was a town with a population of more than 40,000. The palace itself was 2 to 3 stories high, built of cut stone. The men in Knossos moved about proudly and confidently. The women were clothed elegantly and glamorously. The walls were decorated with serene motifs of flowers and animals. War was not glorified here. Arthur Evans, who was knighted for his discoveries, devoted 40 years of his life to this endeavor. He found marble walls and alabaster floors which had been protected by the earth. The Cretans lived in such luxury 3,500 years ago. In the lavishly decorated private chambers of the priest-king, a bathtub was even found. Staircases functioned as ingeniously designed air conditioners. Light shafts provided subdued lighting. Below the floors, complicated drainage conduits had been built for bathrooms and toilets. Even rainwater, which collected in the open courtyards of the palace, passed through a special system of drains. In the storehouses, there were as many as 400 storage vats for wine, oil, grains, and honey. Out of the underground treasure cave came this clay figure. Could this be a Minoan priestess? Such women dominated religious life, and there are those who believe that the throne at Knossos was occupied not by a king, but by a priestess. Who might have worn this ring? Was it the privilege of royal or priestly dignity? Who would have sat upon this throne? Was it used by the king to hold court? Or did snake princesses practice their rituals of sacrifice here? But the most haunting imagery to be found is that of the bull. Stories of bull cults are as old as civilization itself. The taming of a wild bull may be a metaphor for man's primal confrontation with nature. Throughout the palace district, archaeologists continuously came across images of the bull. This bull represents one of the most valuable finds made in Knossos, with gold-plated horns and eyes made of amber. Was he the symbol of a god worshipped by the Cretans? There is much which points to this fact. As in this wall fresco, it depicts dangerous games with strong bulls, daring acrobats somersaulting over their backs either in ritual or bizarre sport. Could the bull have been the symbol of a Minoan god transformed into the horrible Minotaur of Greek mythology? The bull has always been an embodiment of a force as closely related to divinity as it is to man. The Cretan bull acrobats must have been well trained in order to survive their absolutely fearless jumps. Such cults were not confined to Crete. In modern Spain, the remnants of the bull cult have survived to this day. Yet the popular game in the bull ring is no longer regarded as a respectful meeting with the strong opponent, but rather has a harsher purpose, the bull's cruel destruction. When the matador enters the arena, the bull is already so weak that an experienced bullfighter can put a quick end to this uneven contest. The enthusiastic crowd feels no pity for the victimized animal and celebrates the proud victor. But even a wounded bull is still a dangerous adversary. If the matador underestimates his speed, if he makes a wrong move, the bull will give him little time to escape. Did bull games such as these originate from the legend of the deadly Minotaur? In ancient times, the Minoans traded with all the peoples of the Aegean and were amongst the first to sail to the land of the pharaohs. The Cretan representatives traveled up the river Nile to the legendary city of Thebes. They must have regarded the holy temple city of Karnak with such awe. The palaces in their homeland of Crete, in Knossos, Festos and Malea, were on a much smaller scale. The images of their kings never as grand as these gigantic pharaohs. But the Cretans were not only impressed, they were also quick learners. Archaeologists claim to have observed in Cretan palaces architectural designs similar to the temples dedicated to Isis, Osiris and Hathor. Yet the Minoans had treasures of their own. Their pottery was known throughout the world for its exquisite beauty and craftsmanship. Its distinctive geometric patterns and naturalistic imagery were prized by the pharaohs. The Minoans were popular and respected in Egypt. They didn't come with warships on buccaneering raids, but as peaceful merchants. But then, suddenly, all mention of the Minoans came to an abrupt end in the papyrus texts of Egyptian scribes. So what happened? The answer is not clear. The search for the truth has led to much speculation. According to the German scientist Hans Wunderlich, Knossos was not a royal palace, but a huge cemetery. To him, the bull horns were a symbol of death. The dead were carried in processions along the streets to their final resting places, where they were embalmed by priests. Neither might nor glory reigned here, only sorrow and quietness. If this was the place of an all-encompassing death cult, then where was the palace of the kings to be found? Hans Wunderlich's theory has been disproved, however. Not far from the palaces, archaeological expeditions have uncovered, in a ravine above the sea, the ashes of the dead from Minoan times in burial caves. Mountain caves were always considered holy places by the Cretans, for here they were close to the mysterious powers of nature, the eternal cycle of death and birth. Over 5,000 years ago, the Eileithia cave served as a place of worship. Here Minoans found solace in the dark, a chance to dwell in the womb of the earth. By torchlight, the stalactites cast eerie shadows on the broken pieces of the sacrifice receptacles dedicated to the gods thousands of years ago. At the center of the monument stands a stalagmite which was regarded as a symbol of fertility. A low stone wall surrounds the sanctuary. In Crete, the legend continues today, whereby pregnant women rub themselves against the stalagmite, believing it will protect them during pregnancy. Mount Ida, a mountain covered in snow even in the summer, was an important holy place for the Cretans. The Greeks believed that the god Zeus was born here. Not far from the White Mountain lie the ruins of Phaestus, the most important palace on the island after Knossos. It was here that archaeologists made a dramatic discovery, a document with some form of hieroglyphics. Symbols are engraved in the small slab of clay. Many have attempted in vain to decipher the mystery of this writing. All that's known about the message on the Disc of Phaestus is that its engraved hieroglyphics are to be read from the outside in. Groups of symbols repeat themselves, and it's thought that the disc may be an early form of hymn or prayer. In 1979, excavations at Mount Iuktas caused archaeologists to seriously reassess their views on Minoan religion. In this hilltop sanctuary was found the key to a mystery and a startling surprise. 30 double-headed axes were found. In ancient Greek, the word labyrinth meant the place of the double-headed axe, the symbol of the Minoan religion. evidence was uncovered to suggest that the Minoans may not have been as peaceful as was first thought. In a central chamber, rows of vases and jars lined the room, containing the bones of animals. At the front of the chamber were a pair of clay feet, a vestige of a wooden statue, possibly of the mother goddess. In the antechamber, there was a broken plate with a depiction of a bull on it. Was it used to collect the blood of animal sacrifices? Next to it, the remains of a human. Was he a priest? But what lay ahead would confirm a disturbing feature of the Minoan personality, a preoccupation with the shedding of blood. The proof was preserved with the help of a catastrophe, an earthquake capturing a moment in time. Animal sacrifices were common in the Minoan religion. A fresco painted on the side of a sarcophagus shows priestesses performing a bull offering on such an altar. The bull has been killed, and its blood is drained for holy rituals. But on the sacrificial altar at Mount Euctus was the body of a 17-year-old boy whose throat had been cut and the blood drained from his body. Rather than pleasing the gods, the offering must have angered them. Immediately after the murder, an earthquake struck, burying the priests and the victims under the rubble. In the 15th century BC, the rich culture of the Minoans, one that awed and inspired the earliest civilizations of the Mediterranean, vanished almost overnight. But was the powerful empire of the Minoans destroyed by natural forces, or was there human intervention? Archaeologists looked 70 miles to the north of Crete, to the island of Santorini, also known as Thera. Its crescent shape testifies to a violent volcanic past. Its harbor is a gigantic caldera, so deep no ship's anchor can touch the bottom. In the middle, a volcanic dome rises out of the sea, an awesome monument to the fourth largest eruption in the last 20,000 years. A cataclysm that some believed led to the ruin of Minoan civilization. The terraced landscape and rich volcanic soil makes the island ideal for vineyards. Santorini is home to some of the finest wines in the world. While tourists flock to Santorini for sun and the island's quaint village life, archaeologists are searching for more clues about the destruction of the Minoan Empire. In 1967, archaeologists discovered the town of Akrotiri, a Minoan settlement on the southern coast of Santorini. A massive eruption had buried its streets and buildings. In the rubble, scientists found clues which suggested the eruption may have coincided with the fall of the Minoans. Gradually, the buried city began to divulge its secrets. Kitchens and workshops offered a glimpse of the life of its inhabitants from 3,500 years ago. Storage jars still contained grain kernels and olive pips. However, working among the crumbling walls was dangerous. The man who first discovered Akrotiri was killed by falling rocks and buried in his town. His daughter, Nano Marinatos, is carrying on his work.
Most of us archaeologists agree that the Minoans had a kind of empire, a thalassocracy, an empire of the seas. What we don't know is what the ruling class was like. My theory is that the ruling class were priests, that they had special connections, or they claimed that they had special connections with the deity, so that they appeared in front of the public dressed as gods, and we have fairly good evidence from the frescoes from that point of view.
Many houses in Akrotiri were decorated with frescoes of familiar images, priestesses paying homage to their gods. Even this young man, archaeologists believe, with his abundant catch of fish, may be on his way to the sacrifice altar. But this glittering world sank in the chaos of the powers of nature. A massive volcanic eruption buried its streets and buildings. Clouds of ash engulfed the entire region. Towns and villages were buried beneath the flowing lava. Crops were ruined and livestock suffocated. But the biggest threat came from the sea. Giant waves, or tsunamis, swept across the Aegean, swamping Crete's harbour town 70 miles away, bringing the Minoans to their knees. However, two scientists who dispute this theory are the German geologists Hans Pichler and Walter Friedrich. For 30 years, they've been searching the crater like detectives for support of their scientific theory. The layer of ash and pumice stone that destroyed the city of Akrotiri is up to 60 meters deep. These colossal rocks were hurled through the air by the last great eruption of the Bronze Age. Within these rocks, Pichler and Friedrich hoped to find evidence that the earthquake that destroyed Santorini was not responsible for the fall of the Minoan Empire. Professor Friedrich has discovered a prehistoric settlement inside the crater. This is an indication that this broad crater existed before the eruption that was supposed to have destroyed Crete. Even within this inconspicuous piece of rock were yet more signs. The fossilized remains of sea snails, tens of thousands of years old, indicate that the volcano erupted from the sea floor long before the powerful explosion that buried Akrotiri. Based on their new research findings, the scientists can now put forward their own interpretation of the Santorini eruption 3,500 years ago. The eruption started with the formation of clouds of water vapor pushing up from the volcano's interior. Then comes the powerful explosion phase. Hot ash and pumice stone are hurled 37 kilometers high into the stratosphere. The wind carries the ash southeast to Crete. The crater funnel bursts. Water rushes in and combines with the glowing magma to form a highly explosive mixture. All life on Santorini is destroyed. Seawater rushes into the eruption crater and re-emerges as a massive mudslide. Fatal for Santorini, but not for Crete. The scientists are intent on finding more clues, and they're continuing their search. Climbing in the loose volcanic rocks can be hazardous, but it's exactly here that the remains of trees and plants burnt by the hot volcanic ashes are to be found. Could they contain the answer to the question about the time of the eruption that buried Akrotiri?
In this place, we can pick up charcoal from among the volcanic rock. and then research it later in the laboratory.
Im Labor untersucht wird.
The specimens taken by Walter Friedrich from Santorini are analyzed in Denmark using the very latest technology. The most complicated scientific evaluations are now made easy through increasingly sophisticated methods. The age of organic material can be determined by analyzing the rate at which its carbon content disintegrates. However, large amounts of the test sample are required, and the Santorini samples were not available in sufficient quantity. Nuclear physics came to their aid. The tiny amounts of carbonized wooden remnants from Santorini's crater walls were pressed into cartridges of a tandem accelerator. With this powerful high-tech machinery, the exact time of the volcanic eruption can be determined. Stabilized by an enormous magnetic field, electrically charged particles shoot through the tubes onto the cartridge chamber containing the charcoal samples. On impact, the material is shattered in such a way as to enable the computer to take exact measurements of the carbon particles. At the end of the experiment, geologists get their first look at the results. The volcano erupted as early as 1650 BC, 150 years before it was originally thought. So, the volcano of Santorini could not have destroyed Crete. So what did? Thousands of miles north of Crete, in the perennial ice of Greenland, the final piece of proof of the Danish research results is found. Here, the temperatures never rise above freezing. Scientists have come here in order to drill through the thick armor of Greenland's ice to help solve the mystery of the past. Snowstorms and freezing temperatures impede the work at the research station. The extreme weather conditions forced the scientists to develop a special drilling technology. For a year, the crew worked in chambers drilled deep into the snow until they reached the firm subsoil. The drilling core is now 3 kilometers long. It discloses, through highly complicated investigations, changes in climate and information about the last 2 ice ages. The researchers can look back 200,000 years into the Earth's history. How could volcanic eruptions from faraway Crete leave their tracks in the ice of Greenland? The answer? Acid rain, so often thought to be a curse of the 20th century.
What we're measuring here is how ice conducts electricity. And that's interesting because it's determined by the chemicals that are in the ice. And on this screen here we have a large peak that's probably due to a volcanic eruption which puts a lot of acid into the ice and therefore causes the electrical conductivity to go up.
Dr. Wolf confirmed the Danish research results. The eruption on Santorini took place in 1644 BC, 200 years before the end of Minoan civilization. Back on Crete, the archaeologists also make a new discovery. Moklos, on the northern coast of Crete. During the time of Minos, there was a prosperous trading city here. The remains of the old harbor area today lie underwater. For many years now, an American team of archaeologists has been working on a small island adjacent to Moklos. Settlements here were vulnerable to fallout from the Santorini eruptions. Layer after layer of soil are removed and carefully sifted so that nothing is overlooked. The leader of the excavation group is Professor Jeffrey Soules of the University of North Carolina.
We're here in the room with the column base in house C1. When we excavated down to the floor of this house, we came upon good late Minoan 1B pottery like this, which dates the construction of the house to that time. As we excavated beneath the floor, we came upon a thick lens of Santorini tephra, part of which we've left in place, and you can see it here. It's a good 10 centimeters thick, and it extended all across the floor of the room, underneath the walls of the house. It must have fallen before the house was constructed. The importance of this discovery was that it fixed the relative position of the eruption of the volcano at Santorini in relation to Minoan pottery styles. The volcano must have erupted right at the end of the late Minoan 1A period, and it must have inaugurated the late Minoan 1B period.
For many years now, another archaeologist, Philip Betancourt, has been researching Crete's past. On the island of Psira, he discovered a settlement from the Bronze Age. The island is presently uninhabited, but in the Minoan era, its inhabitants achieved wealth through farming and cattle breeding. Professor Betancourt has found more traces of volcanic material.
The destruction of this house in late Minoan 1A might be connected to the eruption of Thera. It was built in the latter years of the Middle Bronze Age and survived only into late Minoan 1A. We know it cannot have been destroyed by tsunamis because the island itself will have acted as a barrier, but it is possible that the sea swelled up when the volcano erupted, and it's also, of course, very possible that there were earthquakes. The building was destroyed violently and was not rebuilt, which is not common at Psira. Instead, they built farther up the peninsula, away from the sea, and they built of much larger stones.
Crete's decline cannot be sufficiently explained through natural catastrophe alone. Betancourt believes that man was also responsible.
The building we're in and the room we're in now is a kitchen, and in it we found the cooking pot still in place and the stone tools for grinding grain still in place. But just outside the building we found a vast mass of pottery from all of the storage jars in the town in this building, which were thrown violently out into the street, lying in a great heap of mixed pottery. This gives us the evidence that the town was destroyed by war. We don't know if it was the Mycenaeans who came from the mainland or if it was a civil war in Crete, but it must have been war that destroyed, leaving this type of evidence.
So there was a war. Misfortune befell Crete not at the hands of the gods, but through mankind. But who were these destroyers? On the Peloponnesus, the peninsula forming the southern part of the Greek mainland, the Cretans were facing increasingly menacing competition. The Mycenaeans were indebted to the Cretans for their religion, writing, and art, but they also wanted their land. From far away, the mighty walls of Mycenae's fortress suggest that here reigned a people of warriors. In the royal Mycenaean tombs, a German treasure hunter, Heinrich Schliemann, discovered this golden death mask. Did this gold come from wealthy Crete? Golden cups and jewelry bear the marks of Cretan craftsmanship. Were they pieces of commerce or war prizes? Did the Mycenaeans attack and conquer the island of Crete?
The best explanation at the moment for the destruction of Minoan civilization is the arrival of the Mycenaean Greeks. They occupied Knossos. We have evidence for their occupation in the Linear B tablets, which have been translated in our Mycenaean Greek, in a new pottery style that is introduced at Knossos in the LM2 period, and in new burials, shaft graves, that are constructed at various points around the palace at Knossos.
Even on the beaches of Komos, On Crete's southern shore, archaeologists detected traces of Mycenaeans. For the past 18 years, Professor Joseph Shaw of Toronto has been digging in the sand dunes. As unusual as his digging tools have been, his most important discovery has been the massive foundations of large shipyards built by the Mycenaeans.
One interesting aspect of the site is that we have no major destruction by fire at the end of late Minoan 1B, which at neighboring Ayatriada, for instance, might be thought of as the result of an armed incursion by the Mycenaeans. Perhaps, if it was the Mycenaeans, that they preferred not to destroy the harbor of Komos.
But new buildings were erected on the ruins of Ayatriada. Large steps lead down to where there would have been a Mycenaean Greek market street, where every vendor had his own shop, a novelty in the Crete of those days. But it's a tradition which carries on to this day in the Oriental markets. It appears that the news of Crete's new rulers traveled rapidly to Egypt. In the western part of Thebes, in the direction of the setting sun, the pharaohs erected their gigantic temples. In the depths of their grave chambers, the dead, along with their treasures, would be able to start their long journey to the hereafter undisturbed. Even high-ranking officers of the empire were buried here, slightly away from the rulers. An Egyptian peasant village currently stands on their graves. In their search for treasures, the residents uncovered the grave chambers beneath their homes. While still alive, the Egyptian chancellor, Rekhmire, had his tomb painted in lively colors. On the walls are depicted the foreign representatives whom the chancellor had received in the pharaoh's court. They provide us with priceless documentation of the Cretan merchants and the precious gifts. It must have been shortly before his death that Rekhmire learned of the political turbulence on Crete, because the Cretans' garments in the tomb were painted over. Did the Mycenaeans take Crete by force, or did the Minoan Empire simply collapse under its own weight?
The theories about the destruction of Minoan Crete have changed considerably over the years. In the times of Evans and following him, people thought in terms of natural catastrophes, cosmic cataclysms, earthquakes, and even the volcanic eruption of Santorini here. But now we tend to think in terms of a more human element, for example, a social collapse of the system, or perhaps that the Minoan fleet was not so effective as the years went by. And we're trying to construct more historical models. So things are not quite so simple. Personally, what I think happened is that the social system of Crete collapsed.
Every system which develops in order to accommodate and solve problems of the society, when it does not develop further to solve the new problems, it collapses. And the best example is the Soviet Union.
Now we know that there were lots of earthquakes in Minoan Crete at the time of the destruction of the palaces. And if my theory is correct, namely that the ruling class were priests, then these destructions would have been very unnerving for the priests themselves because they couldn't do anything about them. And this may be the reason why they lost credibility with the populace. The people felt that the priests weren't doing their job. And so the earthquakes may have contributed in an indirect way to the collapse of the palaces in Minoan Crete.
The Cretan site where Theseus and Ariadne were united is an eerie place. But it is possibly here, in the labyrinth of the myths, that the true story of the fall of the Minoan civilization is hidden. Were they destroyed by an earthquake, an uprising, or by war? Or by the hand of a foreign prince, fired by revenge and ambition? The ruins are silent. But in the recesses of a dark legend, the Minoans live on, the subjects of our imaginations, and a myth forever hinting at secrets, mysteries, and monsters of the Minoan world.